Welcome to Students in La Cocina. My name is Asalia, and today we are currently in the bistro. I will be cooking a special rice from Nicaragua that my grandmother has taught me, and I will also be cooking a sopa de lentejas, or lentil soup, that my other grandma taught me. Now we can head on over into the kitchen. Hi! So we're here in the bistro kitchen, and I'm getting ready prepping for the sopa de lentejas. So to start with, I've already pre-cut the onions because nobody wants to see tears. But basically, and I think that's part of what the preparation of cooking has been for me. And it's like my grandmas both have always taught me that before you start cooking, you need to make sure you have everything. And so for the sopa, we have obviously the lentejas, we have some tomato sauce, we have some actual tomatoes, onions, carrots, and a few other things. And why I think I chose this one specifically was because I've always enjoyed it and I never knew how to make it. So finally I told my grandma, I was like, hey, I want to know how to make it. And she kind of laughed and she was like, it's one of the easiest soups you could possibly make. I'm going to cut up the onions. And so for this, I usually do kind of small diced onions. Not a lot of people like onions. I know in my family, I am probably the person that likes onions the most, which is funny because I don't like onions. Yeah, and then with that, I think the sopa de lentejas is kind of, I would say, a soup that you kind of have when you're sick, but it's also a really good comfort soup, just like chicken noodle soup, I guess it would be. I definitely don't eat chicken noodle soup that much. I would much rather go for a sopa de lentejas and or a different type of soup that my grandma makes, which is a sopa de albóndigas, which hopefully maybe you'll see me cooking that next time. Next I'm going to do some garlic. Also not a popular ingredient. I think for certain people it's very potent. So I'm also keeping like all of the food extras because here at the bistro we compost, which is definitely not something I was aware of before I got here. And it's kind of cool that we do have composting because that means we're contributing less waste to the environment and in general being more sustainable. I think this university is really good at being sustainable. And so same thing with the onions. I would like to get the garlic super, super small, just so when you're like eating the soup, you don't feel it and or don't bite into it. I don't think it's very satisfying to bite into a huge piece of garlic, especially if you don't like it. So let's get that nice and small. And so the original recipe that my grandma showed me is just kind of lentils. There's some cilantro that you put on top, which I wasn't able to get today. But I've kind of tweaked it for myself. I personally sometimes add potatoes. Carrots are what I'm going to add in today. And I think it just adds to like the substance of it and being able to feel like you're eating like a full meal versus just kind of like an appetizer or something. And so it's very flexible in the sense of what you can add or take away from it. There's a lot of spices that go into it. Definitely, I don't think specifically Mexicans believe that you can overspice something. You can always just go for it. So again, want to get them as small as possible, depending on who you're catering to. And so I don't think many people like huge chunks of anything to kind of take from the flavor of the soup. And so we'll get them small. The garlic's looking good. Personally, I don't like too much garlic. I think it really does help the flavor though. My grandmother would probably add 5 cloves of garlic at least. I'm sticking to 1 and maybe a half. And I also don't think it's ever too late to add things in. I know there's like a general process to how you do things, but it's like whatever works and whatever tastes good. I don't see the problem with how you do things. I don't know where I would be now if specifically my mom, but also my grandmas hadn't taught me how to cook. Also my chulo, who is my grandpa, I would be a very different person if I didn't know how to cook. I think when I'm having a hard time in college and when I'm just generally not in a good place, I always find myself cooking. I always find myself going back to like the basic functions of chopping onions and chopping garlic and doing all that stuff, which seems kind of weird when I say it out loud, but it's also the most like basic routine besides like writing. So I'm an English major and writing is kind of my passion and it's what I want to do. And so now I'm going to put this in the pot. I'm getting ready to start cooking for real and move beyond just like dicing. And so we're also going to get the onions in there and we'll do a type of like saute and get the flavor, get them to sweat. I think that's a good way to phrase it. I'm not a chef, so I can't say I know the lingo of being in the kitchen, but I know the general idea of how it feels and what happens to the food in the steps. And so I always start, and this is something I think both my grandmas do, is always start with the onions and the garlic and put a little bit of olive oil or any type of oil into it to kind of get them caramelized, and then also just to get that flavor out. And so some people would prefer to only start with the onion, which is fine. I think that mixing the onion and the garlic together creates a special kind of flavor that I have found to be the best. I also am kind of picky in the sense of what I cook. I only cook what I will eat. I know most people will try to cook a little bit of everything, but I really do think that there's like something special in saying that I'm willing to eat what I'm producing and I know what I'm producing. And so one thing that I tell all my staff when they're getting ready to start in the kitchen is try what you're making. Always know what you're producing. And I think generally, if you don't know what you're talking about, it's really hard to feel passionate about it. And so when it comes down to it, it's like, also don't eat anything that you're allergic to. Like that's not what I'm saying. Please don't do that. But if you want to be like a chef, or even in general, like if you want to learn how to cook, part of it is finding what you like. And so when you're passionate about something, if you like chocolate cake, try that out first. Don't try to make red velvet. Don't try to make anything else. Start with what you know and like specifically, and it's going to make it a lot easier to branch out and to eventually be able to make things that you never thought you were going to be able to make. Yeah. So I personally always skin my carrots. I know some people don't do that, and it's kind of just up to you and what feels right. Again, do what you know, do what you like. And so we're going to put these down a little. We don't want the onions to burn. That would not be positive. And so we get the carrots to nice little pieces. That sounds dangerous. I'm gonna cut that off. So yes, these are our compost bins. So like I said, bistro, we compost. Generally, in the university, there is like this big movement to be more sustainable, to go green. And so we definitely try our best in any way that we can to do that. Let's see. let's see. So I'm actually gonna find a bowl. We'll put this in there for now. And we'll get the tomatoes ready. So for this soup, I decided, again, tweaking and finding what I like and what fits for my appetite. I use both, like tomato sauce and fresh tomatoes. I think there's something beautiful in what tomatoes and like a fresh, touched, processed tomato can do to your food. Same thing with like onion powder versus like raw onions. It's really a different flavor that you get. And so I would encourage anyone that is trying cooking to start with fresh produce. It'll make a difference in what your taste buds taste and or feel for the first few times that you cook. Once you get used to it and once you know like the general flavor, it's a lot easier to start messing around, taking shortcuts, and stuff like that. And since I only have 1 cup of lentils, I'm gonna stick to like one tomato and maybe like a can and a half of tomato sauce. I also am not a big person for recipes in the sense of like, here's a measurement, here's this and that. It's definitely helpful to know like how much is going into it, but it's all, for me personally, it's all about the flavor. And so I would add like a lot more cilantro to garlic. Personally, I love the flavor of cilantro. I think when you allow it to sit in the soup, it creates such a different atmosphere for your mouth. But that's also just me. And so your tomatoes don't have to look pretty. Again, the smaller they are, I think for me, it's a lot easier to just like digest at the end of it. I'm not big, well actually I'm really big on texture. I think that's the other part of making this soup and kind of changing it from what my grandma originally taught me. I think texture is a really big thing, and so when something is like too clumpy, is that the right word? It doesn't feel right, and I think it takes from the flavor for me. But when I can kind of just have it all in one, it definitely makes it a lot easier. So I'll add this to the garlic and the onions. And we'll see this a little bit more with the rice that I'm gonna make is, I don't time things as much, but when it comes down to the onions do this like they become almost clear, see-through color. That's when they're ready, and it's time to add in the rest of the thing. So definitely waiting for those onions to become a little see-through, and then we'll add some water and we'll add the tomato sauce and the rest of the stuff, and then we'll go on to the rice. So now that we've got the onions, the garlic, and the tomato in the pan, we're gonna start slicing and dicing the carrots. Let's see. I would also say one thing that cooking has done for me is finding and having this time to really think and be with myself. And it's definitely an alternative form of meditation that has happened. And so I think just about everyone in my family cooks in one way or another, and we all have a very different rhythm of cooking. I love to typically blast some good cumbias or some salsa, and just really whatever I'm like in the mood for. Recently it has been some Kendrick Lamar, so that's been a really interesting shift. But it's like whatever, I feel like when I'm making like this cultural food and when I'm making stuff that reminds me of home, I typically play music that also reminds me of home. So I do have a particular playlist that's called Para mi alma, which means like for my heart, for my soul, and it's songs that I really I grew up hating, or I think hating is a strong word. I grew up trying to rebel against, and so my mom, like any good Mexican mother would wake us up on Saturday mornings real early, 7 a.m., to clean. And the way she did this was by blasting her music. Some Ramon Ayala, Los Tigres del Norte, and or other things like that. She also played some country music, which was like, thinking back now, I'm like, that's really interesting that my mother would play country music. But it has definitely left its kind of fingerprints on me. And so now whenever I'm up early on a Saturday morning, you can ask either of my housemates. I will be blasting my cumbias and my salsa to definitely feel in tune with what's happening around me and to feel kind of like part of it. I think sometimes in life we get so busy going and just like doing things and having like a checklist and like I gotta do the dishes, I gotta do my laundry, I gotta cook, I gotta do all these other things, and sometimes we forget that, well, all we have is right now, and we need to be present and we need to do things for the sake of just being and being happy and being okay with where we're at. And so I think also we live in a society that things are constantly changing. We're constantly seeing shifts in the political climate, in the social climate, and it really does, I think, impact how we feel and how we see things. And so if you're not okay with that, for me, the way that I find time to be okay with it is by cooking, is by chopping some carrots and actually talking through it. And so this is not the first time that I have talked out loud while cooking. I often do it because I need to process. We're human beings. We can't just leave everything inside. So this is just about ready. And then we'll put it all together. We'll want to get some spices in there. Like I mentioned, don't shy away from the spices. You could overspice, but I haven't seen it happen. We'll start off a little conservative in the sense of definitely have to taste along the way of what's working and what's not working. And so once you add the spices, the smell and the aroma is going to take over your kitchen, which is personally my favorite part. Let's see what's left. We'll get some lemon in there. I personally love lemon. It's it's magical. We'll just get that in there. So then, let's see, the carrots and the lentils, typically I put in around the same time. If there was potatoes, I would have put the potatoes first because it would just take forever to soften. And we'll keep on adding water and keep on adding spices so that we have enough liquid left over so that it's more of like a soup versus a stew. Let's see, we'll get this in there. Awesome. Let's see what is left. So we've got our carrots in, we got 1 tomato in, the garlic, a can. We'll do a can and a half, just so we can make sure we have enough of the tomato sauce. And that will also add a very different flavor to a soup that is more like spice and curry based. And so I've done a type of lentil soup that has curry powder, and it definitely is a very different flavor than one that is solely based in like tomatoes and lemon. I think they're both great, just different. Get that in here. And again, I found the recipe with the curry online. Pinterest is great. And it definitely has made a lot more recipes from different cultures more accessible. And so, for instance, the rice that I'll be making is specifically from Nicaragua. And I did not imagine that I would be able to find it online, but after I initially learned how to make it, and I kept on forgetting the rice to water ratio, I looked it up and found that it was there, and it was accessible, and it was great, and it was actually almost exactly what my grandma had taught me. So it's pretty tomatoey, so it means we can definitely add some more lemon. And then we'll end up adding quite a bit more spices. So plate it conservatively, but now we're gonna wanna add some more coriander for sure. And so we'll definitely want to wait for that to boil before we add in the rest of the ingredients. So process-wise, I would say once we get the carrots and the lentils in, we will be able to start on the rice. And so the rice is probably the easiest part. It takes about 20 minutes. The onions are already chopped. We'll cut up some bell peppers. We'll add some salt, and then just let it kind of set. So let's get the carrots in there. And so I want to do this gently so you don't burn yourself. So we'll get the lentils in there. And so again, this is a really good time to taste what's going on. Ooh, I'm liking that. Oh, trying to figure out what it needs. So we'll go with the cayenne. And so also based on like where it's at, we're gonna add some more water. Cool. And so realistically now that's gonna set for anywhere between 20, 30-ish minutes. You can taste it periodically. You can also kind of just check in on it. But it will need some time for the carrots to soften and for the lentils to soften also, I guess. And so now we'll start on the rice. And so the rice is a little bit more difficult in the sense of like, because onions, so this is actually the opposite. If you know that the people you're cooking for don't really like onions, leaving them in a bigger size is going to be so helpful for them to be able to take out the pieces eventually. But onions are pivotal to this rice. So we'll get a little bit more onions in there. But again, so this is where we wait. The waiting game is making sure that they now become clear. And so at first, I did not understand what that meant until finally I saw it happen, and it was kind of cool. Also bell pepper. And so I know kind of traditional, or what you understand for what most people think of when rice is kind of just like a simple rice, maybe some tomato sauce in there. And so why I love this rice so much is because it's so different, and it's just so, it's so flavorful, honestly. And it's kind of an entire meal in of itself. And so this recipe is very specific to Nicaragua, which is my dad's side of the family. And it's also kind of my favorite because it's so simple, yet it's so great. And so some of my aunts from my mom's family, which are from Mexico, and my cousins love this rice so much that like they actively, every time they come to my dad's family's like parties or we like have gatherings, they're always like, oh my gosh, did your grandma make the white rice? And I'm like, yes, there will be white rice. And everyone who has ever eaten it actively enjoys it. I cannot say that I make it correctly, but I try my best. Checking on that soup. Make sure it's doing all right. It's boiling. Awesome. Alright, so these are looking just about ready. And so right before they're like perfect, you'll usually add in the bell peppers so that they also have a chance to kind of soften and release their flavor. So you'll want to get it as much covered in oil so that it all can toast pretty evenly. And so I just love the way it looks. Like the color, the green pops so much. The onions look pretty. So we can actually add a little bit of salt to this one. And so I won't put too much salt because the tomato sauce already came with salt and we don't want anything over salted. That up a little bit. I will add some more lemon. And so also, and again, like back to the whole like do what you like. And so sometimes I'm in the mood for something more spicy, so I'll add some more spice to it. Put some jalapenos in there. Always adds for the kick when you put some fresh jalapenos into soups, and or add more lemon. And so can never go wrong with a good lemony soup. And so I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but at the bistro we have staff dinners. And so once a month we gather most of the staff together, and a few of us, usually the managers, will end up cooking. And so that is one of my personal favorite times of the month, and it's one of the special things I think about the bistro. And so I've done anything from like full on we made enchiladas once, we made empanadas, we've done like quinoa bowls, curry, and a little bit of everything, actually a little bit of everything. We dabble in whatever is accessible to us and whatever feels right. And so one beautiful thing about the staff is it's very diverse, and so we have different backgrounds here, and we have, so myself, obviously, as a Latina, I bring my own type of style in cooking. And so yeah, we'll wait for it to toast. And so it typically, you can kind of see it a little bit. It starts to change colors. If you are using a brown rice, it'll be a little bit more difficult to see it toasting. There it goes. You can see it now happening. All right, so let's see. Looking pretty good. So maybe another few seconds, then we can add the water and let it simmer. So I think it's just about ready. Let's see that. We can put a few different colors in here. All right. So because we did 2 cups, we'll add 4 cups of water. And that also, I think, is just a cute view. We'll also add some salt. Not too much, not too little. And I think typically when I'm making a soup and a rice, I'll do less salt in the rice, so that the rice, and that means the rice will have less flavor, but that it's just so that it's a base for the soup, and it doesn't overpower the flavor of the soup. And so we'll let this simmer for about 20 minutes, and so we'll definitely be able to see when the rice absorbs the water, and so if it absorbs it too fast, we'll add more water. If it's too slow, we'll turn up the heat so that it can go a little bit faster, but typically 15-20 minutes, not too long. And so this, you can see, it's coming along well. And so the nice thing about soups is you can continue to add water moderately, and then just continue to add spices. And so especially while the carrots and the lentils are still cooking, you'll be able to modify it as you go. Cool. So now that everything's finished, the rice looks good. And because I did make the rice specifically to go with the soup, we'll start with a bit of rice at the bottom of the bowl. And so this is the kind of the perfect time. If you don't like bell peppers, if you don't like onions, you can separate that. But then you just go ahead and put that on top. Awesome. Then we'll grab our spoons and we can eat. Perfect. Oh yeah. Oh, good. So thank you for being here today with me for Students in la Cocina. Again, my name is Asalia, and today we made some sopa de lentejas and Nicaragüense style rice.